The European Union has responded to Donald Trump's newest threats on trade. This after the U.S. president reignited global tensions by threatening to impose a 50% tariff on imports from the European Union.
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal. It's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here. Now, if somebody comes in and wants to build a plant here, I can talk to them about a little bit of a delay.
The deal was done, signed, locked in, $43 billion worth of American-made jets. A contract Boeing needed. Workers depended on it, and overnight, it vanished. Not because of a crash, not because of quality, but because of a tweet. In June 2025, the Trump administration slapped a 50% tariff on European imports. Steel, cars, machinery. The EU didn't scream. It didn't beg. It just walked away. One phone call from Brussels, and the largest aerospace deal in U.S. history was paused. Indefinitely. No warning. No second chances. Just silence from our closest ally. Because when trade becomes a weapon, trust becomes collateral damage. And what came next wasn't a negotiation. It was a redrawing of the global map. Europe didn't strike back. It moved on. Canada stepped in. COMAC took meetings. Boeing stock plunged. And for the first time in decades, the U.S. wasn't the center of the conversation. So how did we get here? Let's rewind to the moment this collapse truly began. It started with a press conference, loud, defiant, and televised. June 1st, 2025. The Trump administration imposed a 50% tariff on European steel, cars, and industrial components. The message was clear. America first. Europe second class. But Washington wasn't prepared for how fast Europe would respond. Within hours, Brussels called it a reckless escalation and filed an emergency complaint at the WTO. And within days came the $95 billion counterpunch, a retaliation package engineered to sting. Wine, whiskey, commercial aircraft, farm equipment, American exports caught in the crossfire, across red and blue states alike. But what unsettled insiders wasn't just the speed of the response. It was the tone. This wasn't a fight. It was a divorce. EU leaders weren't shouting. They were stepping back, quietly, strategically. As one German trade official reportedly told CNN, "You don't negotiate with someone who doesn't keep their word." The U.S. had played the tariffs like a hammer, but Europe came with a scalpel, precise, unflinching, and deliberate. And while media spun it as a trade war, inside Brussels the language had shifted. Not retaliation, realignment. Because when partners no longer trust the rules, they stop playing the game. And that's exactly what happened next. The headlines focused on tariffs, but behind closed doors, the real shift was happening. One contract at a time. Ryanair quietly reconsidered its $30 billion Boeing 737 MAX deal. No protest, no press release, just a signal. Boeing was no longer a sure bet. In that silence, China's COMAC moved fast. The once dismissed C919 was suddenly on the table. The reason? Not price, not performance, but predictability. In global aviation, trust isn't built on slogans. It's built on timelines, steady parts, and certainty. And in 2025, Boeing could no longer offer that. Insiders say EU procurement teams began talks with COMAC months before the tariffs ever hit. This wasn't about buying Chinese. It was about avoiding chaos. For airlines, consistency isn't a bonus. It's the business model. And when reliability becomes risk, the pivot is automatic. It didn't make headlines, but it rewrote the playbook. While Washington clung to slogans, Europe rewrote its supplier list. And what came next? didn't just shift trade lanes, it reshaped trust itself. While Washington made noise, Ottawa made moves. Since 2022, trade between Canada and the EU has surged over 70%, not through spectacle, but through quiet alignment. The CETA agreement, once overlooked, became the backbone of a new economic corridor. While the U.S. flexed tariffs, Canada fine-tuned customs. While Washington threatened partners, Ottawa offered predictability. And in a world shaken by volatility, predictability became the most valuable currency. Pharmaceutical contracts, precision engineering, clean tech components all began rerouting from U.S. ports to Canadian ones. It wasn't about power, it was about partnership. And it worked. Brussels didn't see Canada as a competitor to the U.S. It saw a country playing the same long game, with fewer surprises. Infrastructure projects across Ontario and Quebec quietly expanded to match European standards. Ports were modernized, data rules synced, logistics rebuilt for EU compliance, not American convenience. The result? Europe got what it needed, a stable, rules-based North American gateway. And Canada, without a trade war, without a megaphone, became central to the next chapter of transatlantic commerce. But if that was a quiet win for Canada, what happened next made it a loud loss for Washington. For years, we were told it was a strategy, a bold move to bring jobs back, to punish cheaters, to win. But by the first quarter of 2025, the numbers told a different story. The U.S. trade deficit hit $140.5 billion, the largest in American history. That wasn't victory. That was exposure. What was promised as a restoration of American manufacturing became a slow bleed of global relevance. The tariffs didn't bring factories home. They raised prices for U.S. businesses that still needed parts from abroad. And foreign buyers? They adjusted. They built new supply chains. They wrote America out. The irony? While Washington celebrated sovereignty, its closest partners were making long-term plans. Without it, Mexico pivoted south. Europe turned to Canada. Across Asia, even longtime allies began asking if the U.S. could still be counted on. Because when a country makes itself unpredictable, the world responds with distance. Behind the deficit number was something deeper. A trust deficit. Investors pulled back. Procurement heads looked elsewhere. Even aerospace and tech saw contracts rerouted or lost, not because of a crash, but because of quiet, deliberate withdrawal. The kind of loss that doesn't go viral, but doesn't heal either. And that's where the damage truly began. The shift didn't explode. It unfolded, quietly and completely. By mid-2025, the headlines had moved on, but the trade routes hadn't. Europe wasn't retaliating anymore. It was replacing. From hydrogen partnerships to AI regulation, from aircraft supply chains to clean energy grids, a new map of global commerce was being drawn, and the U.S. wasn't on it. Instead of confronting Washington, Europe simply rerouted. Deals flowed to Ottawa, Tokyo, New Delhi, not out of protest, but preference. They weren't fleeing American power. They were bypassing American volatility, because in global diplomacy, predictability is power. And what happened in 2025 wasn't a collapse. It was a managed exit from the world's default partner. As one EU official quietly noted, "We didn't leave the US, they left themselves." The irony: no one forced America out. No treaty was broken. No border closed. The U.S. didn't lose its strength. It forfeited its stability. And in a world where trade depends on trust, America's greatest asset, its reliability, became its greatest liability. That's why global alliances didn't shatter. They shifted. New frameworks emerged. Not anti-American, just post-American. And that shift didn't end with tariffs. It started there, because the real question, moving forward, isn't who leads. It's who others are willing to follow. It didn't happen with sanctions, or summits, or speeches. It happened in spreadsheets, in contract rewrites, in supply chains rerouted quietly across oceans. America didn't fall. It drifted, and no one called it back. For decades, the U.S. defined what global cooperation looked like: stability, scale, leadership. It was the anchor. But in 2025, something deeper than policy unraveled. Trust, not in America's strength, but in its steadiness, in its word. Because when partners are forced to hedge and allies start to plan around you instead of with you, leadership becomes a memory, not a position. Canada didn't raise its voice. It raised its standards. The EU didn't rage. It rerouted. And in the quiet shuffle of ports and procurement and digital policy, the world answered a question no one in Washington wanted to ask. If the cost of following you is chaos, what if we don't? So maybe this isn't about decline. Maybe it's about distance. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful indictment isn't that the world turned against America, but that it stopped turning toward it.